Growing up, there was one particular phrase that I heard almost every single day. It was the go-to reaction to anything awkward, uncool, or annoying. A surprise quiz, a bad haircut, or those weird-looking mashed potatoes from the school cafeteria. So, what was that phrase? That's so gay. Now, look, I know that sounds bad, but it's not that big of a deal, right? I mean, if anyone was ever confronted about it, they would just shrug and say, it's just a joke. Chill. So I knew they had to just be messing around, and there was no point in me getting offended. So I stayed silent. But I also knew that every time I heard it, I felt a little bit smaller. Like a part of me had to shrink just to fit in the room. And even though nobody said it directly, the message was loud and clear. Being gay was something to be ashamed of. And that's the thing about language. It teaches us what's acceptable. So when we say that it's just a joke, we miss the point. Because phrases like this don't just reflect culture, they shape it. They teach kids what's okay to be and what's not. And that has forced many of us to try to change who we are, just to feel like we belong. But just as language can be used to exclude, it can also be used to empower. And if there's one group with the creativity, courage, and influence to lead that change, it's us. Young people have always been the drivers of social movement, so we need to make that push to fix our language and fight for true belonging. So today, I want to look at the true effect these phrases have in our everyday life and understand why they so often go unaddressed. But I want us to do more than just become aware. Together, I want to learn how to build communities where everyone feels safe, seen, and celebrated. Because in a society where language shapes identity, we need to know how to use it. Now, when you think of the word discrimination, you will probably think of something loud, an insult that you recognize instantly. But that's not always the case. In fact, the most common form of discrimination is the kind that's hidden in our everyday language, disguised as a joke, question, or even a compliment. That kind of discrimination is called a microaggression. But let's take a step back, because what does microaggression even mean? Well, the APA Dictionary of Psychology defines a microaggression as, quote, a commonly occurring, brief, verbal, nonverbal, behavioral, or environmental indignity that communicates derogatory attitudes or notions towards a differing other, end quote. Now, that definition is definitely a little wordy and may not even make sense until you hear something like, you play so well for a girl. Your English is so good. Or, that's so gay. Suddenly, that definition becomes a lot more personal. These aren't jokes or compliments like people may try to claim. Instead, they're small jabs that slowly make those who are different feel like belonging is conditional. Psychology professor Daryl Wang-Soo describes the effects of microaggressions as a death by 1,000 cuts. They slowly pile onto each other, eroding a person's sense of identity, safety, and belonging in ways that are often invisible, yet profoundly damaging. They change the way a person not only views themselves, but how they believe others view them too. To truly understand how this happens, we can look to the paper Microaggression, Clarification, Evidence, and Impact by Dr. Monica T. Williams. In this paper, she explains, quote, experiencing a microaggression signals a dangerous environment, resulting in corresponding psychological and physiological stress responses, including but not limited to confusion, anger, anxiety, helplessness, hopelessness, paranoia, fear, anger and frustration. It can also result in dysfunctional coping mechanisms, such as denial, withdrawal, or even substance abuse. Microaggressions communicate a lack of belonging, which can be psychologically damaging, especially for children. The example I gave at the beginning was specific to the LGBTQ+ community, but microaggressions target more than just one group. In fact, they target a wide range of marginalized communities in ways that are often tailored to their specific vulnerabilities. It's when someone is surprised that a student of color is highly intelligent, or assumes that women are the exception in positions of power or strength. And as Dr. Williams explains, children are the most affected, meaning there are people in this room who have carried that kind of pain with them for their entire life. Which brings me to the question, why do we laugh? We often allow microaggressions to pass by unaddressed, not because we don't care, but because our brains are wired to misread them as harmless. Microaggressions are most often delivered as a joke, accompanied by a laugh or a smile. In fact, this delivery is so common that a 2024 survey by The Standard reports that 69% of students reported hearing these kinds of derogatory jokes in schools. Because microaggressions are both perceived as a joke and an insult at the same time, they trigger something known as benign violation theory. This theory, developed by researchers Peter McGraw and Caleb Warren, helps to explain why we're so quick to dismiss microaggressions. It's because they fall in that strange space where harm and humor overlap. This theory works in 3 parts. First, a violation occurs of setting a norm or expectation. Second, that violation is perceived as benign. It's non-threatening or dangerous. And third, both of those things occur at the same time. To help break this down, I want you all to imagine a moment, maybe in a classroom, a workplace, or a group chat, where somebody made a joke that just felt off. You turned your head and wondered, is that okay to say? This is the first part of benign violation theory, the violation. This comment breaks a social or cultural norm, one that is typically tied to respect, identity, or inclusion. And it disrupts the expectation of being treated as a full and equal member of the group. So, you think about saying something about this joke, calling it out, but that's all it is, right? A joke. This framing is what makes the violation feel benign. The speaker is able to brush it off and say, I didn't mean anything by it, and the person it was directed towards may feel like they're being too sensitive. It's not that the harm isn't real, it's that it's socially coded as acceptable. So you don't say anything. Because the violation and the benign interpretation are happening at the same time, you feel the harm, but you also feel the pressure to laugh it off and stay silent. Microaggressions are easy to excuse, easy to dismiss, and even easier to laugh at. And even though they're never a joke, benign violation theory explains why they often feel like one. But it doesn't have to stay that way, because recognizing the violation below the surface is the first step towards creating a change. At the beginning of this talk, I explained how hearing the phrase, "that's so gay," really stung. I didn't understand why I cared so much more than the other kids, and I felt stupid for not getting the joke. It wasn't until years later, when I was sitting on my bedroom floor, staring at the results of an online quiz that read, "You might be gay," that it finally clicked. "That's so gay" had always been used to describe things that were lame, gross, or hated, which created this image in my mind that being gay was something to be ashamed of, which meant that I had become ashamed of myself. I had been conditioned to think that a part of my identity was wrong before I even knew what it was. I felt like I didn't belong. But I also felt like I finally understood. My silence wasn't protecting anyone. Not me, not the next kid to hear "That's so gay" in a school hallway, not the thousands of other children who feel like they no longer belong. Language shapes identity, and when we stay silent, we allow it to tear us apart. But when we speak up, we can use it to bring us together. In order to speak up, we need to start challenging the assumptions these microaggressions make. Professor Daryl Wang-Su encourages us to start making the invisible more visible. This means being aware of the language we use, even if we don't use it with the intention of causing harm. So, the next time you hear someone using a microaggression, even if you think they might mean well, don't let it slip by. Instead, ask them, "What did you mean by that?" Or, "Why did you say that?" These questions hold power because they invite reflection instead of confrontation. They gently push the speaker to examine the intention behind their words, and more importantly, the impact. So, ask those uncomfortable questions. Don't let people tell you it's just a joke. Because the moment that we stop laughing along is the moment that we start changing the conversation. Nelson Mandela once said that the youth are the beating heart of social transformation. And he was right. This problem starts with us, in classrooms, with friends, online. But it can end here, with us too. Microaggressions are never a joke, so speak up. Encourage your friends and family to speak up. Even if you feel like you aren't making a difference, keep trying and celebrate belonging for everybody. Because language shapes identity, but it is our voices that shape change. And besides, if a joke needs someone else to hurt, maybe it wasn't that funny after